My name is Amelia Hartwell. I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant enduring things other people would never tolerate. I believed loyalty meant staying silent, helping, fixing, absorbing every disappointment so nobody else had to. I thought if I kept doing that long enough, eventually my mother would love me the way she loved my younger sister. I was wrong. The moment I finally understood that happened in the middle of a snowstorm, and my 5-year-old daughter almost paid the price for it. The day started like dozens before it. Ava sat at the breakfast table picking marshmallows out of her cereal, while my mother stirred coffee and stared out the kitchen window. My husband Mark had left early for work. Everything felt normal, until Mom brought up Jenna. Again. You should ask Mark for the money. Her tone was casual, almost bored, like she was asking me to pass the salt. I looked up. For what? She sighed dramatically. Jenna's been waiting long enough. There it was. The real conversation. My sister needed money. Again. The details barely mattered anymore. Over the years it had been rent, cars, credit cards, vacation disasters, failed businesses, broken relationships. There was always something. And somehow, the solution always involved me. Or Mark, or both. I put my coffee down carefully. No. Mom blinked. What? No. The word felt strange leaving my mouth. For years I would have softened it. Explained. Apologized. Offered a compromise. Not that morning. Mark and I have our own bills. We have a mortgage. We have Ava. Jenna's problems aren't our responsibility. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow gathering outside. Mom stared at me. Then she slowly stood up. Without another word, she began washing dishes. The conversation appeared over, but something in her expression unsettled me. It wasn't anger. It was worse. Disappointment. The kind she reserved for moments when I stopped playing my assigned role. Looking back now, I think she'd already decided to punish me. A few hours later, Ava wanted to build a snowman. Mom suggested we use the balcony because the backyard was too icy. Nothing about that seemed unusual. The snowfall was beautiful. Soft white flakes drifting through the air. For a few minutes, Ava laughed and chased snow across the concrete while I brushed powder off the patio furniture. Then, everything changed. I heard the sliding glass door close. A second later came the click. The lock. I turned around. Mom stood inside. Arms folded. Expression blank. At first I smiled. I genuinely thought she was joking. I walked over and knocked once. Nothing. I knocked again. Harder. She didn't move. Ava looked up. Grandma? Still nothing. Then Mom leaned forward slightly. Through the glass, I watched her lips move. Freezing might teach you some gratitude. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. Surely no mother would say something like that. Surely no grandmother would. But she didn't laugh, didn't unlock the door, didn't explain. She simply turned around and walked away. The cold hit differently after that. Not just physically, emotionally. The realization settled into my stomach like a stone. She meant it. The temperature was dropping fast. Wind began driving snow sideways across the balcony. Ava wrapped her arms around my leg. Mommy, is Grandma mad? I swallowed. Everything's okay, sweetheart. It wasn't. Not even close. Ava wore only a hoodie. I had a coat. I pulled her into my arms and wrapped my jacket around both of us. Inside, on the kitchen counter, sat my phone, my keys, everything. Mom had seen them there. She knew exactly what she was doing. Minutes crawled by. 5, 10, 15. My fingers began losing sensation. Ava's nose turned pink, then red, then pale. I kept talking to her, telling stories, asking questions. Anything to keep her awake and distracted. The hardest part wasn't the cold. It was the helplessness. Knowing the person causing it was my own mother. At one point, I banged so hard on the glass my hand bruised. No response. Later, I spotted her sitting on the couch, watching television. The volume loud, comfortable, warm. Every now and then, she glanced toward us. Not with concern, with patience. Like she was waiting for me to learn something. My panic started growing. I tried lifting a flower pot, tried smashing a window. The pot bounced harmlessly away. The glass barely vibrated. Double pane. Soundproof. Installed after her divorce years earlier. No one could hear us. No one could see us. The balcony faced the back of the house, completely hidden from the street. Ava eventually curled into my lap. Her tiny hands felt frighteningly cold. I rubbed them constantly, kept checking her face, kept fighting tears. Because if I cried, she'd know how scared I was. And I couldn't let that happen. Not while she needed me. The wind howled harder. Snow collected around the corners of the balcony. My legs were numb. My jaw ached from shivering. I started counting seconds, trying to stay focused, trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. Then, something happened. A sharp knock echoed through the house. Not from the balcony, from the front door. Mom disappeared from the living room. I couldn't see who had arrived. Only hear muffled movement. Then I saw her face. The moment she opened the door, her expression changed instantly. Shock, then fear, then something close to panic. A second later, she gasped so loudly I heard it through the wall. And I knew. Mark had come. But somehow, I also knew he hadn't come alone. The balcony door opened so suddenly, I almost didn't understand what I was seeing. For a second, warm air rushed over us like it belonged to another world. Then Mark was there. He didn't look at my mother first. He looked at Ava. His face changed in a way I had never seen before. He dropped to his knees, pulled her out of my arms, wrapped his coat around her, and carried her inside. I tried to stand. My legs barely worked. One of the officers stepped forward and helped me through the doorway. The heat inside made my skin sting. My fingers burned. My face felt raw. Behind me, my mother kept saying, "This is ridiculous." I was right here. They were fine. No one answered her. Mark sat Ava on the couch and checked her hands, her cheeks, her breathing. "Baby, look at me," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" Ava nodded, dazed and sleepy. I sat beside them, shaking so hard I couldn't hold the blanket one of the officers handed me. The other officer questioned my mother in the hallway. Her voice changed immediately. "Smala, sweeter, victimized. I was just trying to teach my daughter a lesson. She overreacts." They were dressed warmly. The officer asked, "Ma'am, did you knowingly lock a 5-year-old child outside in 15-degree weather?" My mother didn't answer. Not directly. People like her rarely do. Mark later told me how he knew something was wrong. Earlier, while Mom was in the bathroom, I had managed to reach the house phone. I barely got 10 words out. "Mark, Mom locked us outside. Ava's cold." Then the line went dead. Mom had ripped the cord out of the wall. But 10 words were enough. Mark called police before he even got in the car. After an hour, the officers filed a report. They warned my mother that social services might follow up. She stood there pretending to be embarrassed. Not sorry. Just embarrassed that someone outside the family had seen her clearly. We left that night. I packed without looking at her. Ava slept in Mark's arms. In the car, nobody spoke for a long time. Snow blurred against the windshield. The houses we passed glowed warm behind curtains. I kept thinking how many times I had driven those same streets believing I had a family. When we got home, Mark carried Ava to bed. Then, he found me standing in the laundry room, still wearing damp socks. He handed me tea. "Amelia," he said gently, "you're safe now." That was when I finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse against the washing machine while Mark held me. The next morning, my phone was full of missed calls. 5 from Jenna, 2 from unknown numbers. One long message. It began with, "What did you do to Mom?" and ended with, "You're always trying to ruin this family." I read it twice. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. That was the moment something inside me went still. For years, I had believed if something bad enough happened, they would finally understand. But even this wasn't bad enough. Not for Jenna. Not for Mom. So I made a decision. I blocked my sister. Then I sent my mother one message. "We're done." 3 days later, she showed up at our front door. It was early. Still dark. Through the peephole I saw her standing in a winter coat, hair unbrushed, holding a grocery bag like an offering. Mark stood behind me. I didn't open the door. "You need to leave," I said. For a moment, there was only her breathing through the wood. Then she said, "I'm your mother." Like that sentence could erase frostbite. Like blood could unlock any door. Mark stepped closer. "If you don't leave, we're calling the police." That worked. She turned and walked down the driveway. The grocery bag stayed on our porch. Inside were canned soups, a coloring book, and a note addressed to Ava. I threw all of it away. Maybe another daughter would have kept the note. I couldn't. Not after watching Ava's lips turn pale. It might have ended there if Jenna hadn't needed an audience. First came texts from new numbers, then voicemails. One lasted almost 4 minutes. She cried into the phone about family, about loyalty, about our poor mother, about how I had abandoned the only parent we had left. Then she posted online, "Amelia is going through something right now. Please pray for her. She's punishing our mother because Mom wouldn't give her money. She left Mom crying in the snow." I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. For most of my life, I had protected our family's ugliness from public view. Not because they deserved protection, because I was ashamed. This time, I wrote one sentence. My mother locked me and my 5-year-old daughter outside on a balcony in a snowstorm for 40 minutes. I didn't explain, didn't argue, didn't post photos. Just that. One sentence. The comments changed almost instantly. People who had comforted Jenna deleted their replies. Others messaged me privately. Some apologized. Some admitted they weren't surprised. One woman who used to attend church with Mom wrote that my mother had always spoken about me like I was useful, not loved. Another said she remembered Jenna crashing a borrowed car years ago and Mom blaming me for not helping more. I didn't answer them. I didn't need witnesses anymore. The truth had finally left the house. The next month passed quietly on the surface. Inside, everything was different. Ava asked once if she would see Grandma again. I said, "No, not for a while." She nodded. Children understand more than adults want to admit. Jenna didn't stop. She sent a letter, contacted mutual friends, even called Mark's sister, trying to convince her I was unstable. Nothing worked. Then, suddenly, she vanished. 2 weeks later, I found out she'd moved to Florida with a man she'd known for barely a month. No goodbye to Mom. No forwarding address. No guilt. Just gone. And my mother was alone. The phone call came soon after. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mark was at work. Ava was at school. I was folding laundry when an unfamiliar local number called. When I answered, it wasn't my mother. It was a doctor. He said my mother had been diagnosed with something serious. Stage 3. Complicated. Aggressive. She had listed me as her emergency contact. For a moment, I thought there had been a mistake. Then, I understood. Jenna had left, and I was the only name left on the form. The doctor asked if I could come in. I hung up, not out of cruelty. I simply couldn't breathe. I sat on the floor beside a basket of clean towels and saw the balcony again. The lock, the glass, Ava's cold fingers, my mother's face behind the window. That night, I picked up the phone twice, put it down twice. Mark didn't tell me what to do. He only said, "Whatever you decide, make sure it's something you can live with." The next morning, I called the hospital back, and against every wounded part of myself, I said I would come. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. As I walked down the hallway, I kept wondering why my heart was racing. I wasn't there to forgive her. I wasn't there to reconcile. I wasn't even sure I was there because I cared. Maybe I just needed answers. Maybe I needed to see whether the woman who locked her daughter and granddaughter out in a snowstorm was capable of understanding what she'd done. When I stepped into the room, I barely recognized her. My mother looked smaller, frailer, older than she had just a few months earlier. The sharp edges that had always defined her seemed worn down. Her hair was thinner. Her skin looked gray beneath the fluorescent lights. For a second, she smiled. The kind of smile someone gives when family visits, after a long trip. As though nothing had happened. As though there wasn't an entire winter sitting between us. "Amelia." I didn't smile back. I sat down quietly. She immediately started talking. About the food. About the nurses. About the hospital temperature. About television programs she hated. About everything except the reason I was there. I listened. Patiently. Waiting. Eventually she ran out of distractions. Silence settled between us. Then she sighed. I don't remember exactly what I said that day. I stared at her. She continued. I was stressed. You were being difficult. It was supposed to be a few minutes. A few minutes. The phrase hit me harder than I expected, because even now she was measuring her actions instead of their consequences. She talked about intentions, about misunderstandings, about being overwhelmed. She used every excuse available, every explanation, every justification, everything except the two words that mattered. I'm sorry. When she finally stopped speaking, I stood up. I'm leaving. For the first time, genuine panic appeared in her eyes. Wait. I paused. Her voice became smaller. Do you hate me? I looked at her for a long moment. Then, I answered honestly, I don't know. And I walked out. The hospital kept calling. Then the social worker called. Then her insurance case manager. Every conversation led to the same question. Would I help? Would I coordinate appointments? Would I assist with transportation? Would I become her caregiver? Meanwhile, Jenna was nowhere. The hospital had tried contacting her. Every number was disconnected. Every message unanswered. She hadn't just left. She had disappeared. Part of me wanted to do the same. But every time I imagined walking away completely, I saw a future version of myself wondering if I had become the same kind of person who abandoned people when they became inconvenient. That thought bothered me more than helping her. So I agreed. Not because she deserved it. Because I needed to live with myself. Mark never questioned the decision. Not once. Instead, he helped me create boundaries. Strong ones. We arranged schedules. We made sure Ava wouldn't be involved. We established rules. If I was going to help, it would be on my terms. The first few weeks felt mechanical. Appointments, medication, groceries, paperwork, nothing more. My mother kept trying to recreate the past. She told stories about family vacations, childhood birthdays, school events, as though nostalgia could replace accountability. I rarely responded. One afternoon she mentioned Jenna for nearly 20 minutes. The next day she didn't mention her at all. A few days later, I noticed something else. The excuses had started disappearing. Slowly, quietly, almost reluctantly. One evening I was packing my bag after organizing her medication. She was sitting in the living room staring at the dark television screen. Suddenly she spoke. What I did to you and Ava? I stopped moving. Her voice trembled slightly. I think about it every night. No excuses followed. No explanations. No blame. Nothing. Just the statement. Raw and exposed. I didn't answer. Didn't comfort her. Didn't forgive her. But for the first time, I believed she understood. That night felt different. No dramatic. Not emotional. Just different. Something shifted. The pretending began to die. Weeks passed. The routine continued. But the conversations changed. She stopped talking about how unfair life had been. Stopped defending Jenna. Stopped rewriting history. Instead, long silences filled the house. And strangely, those silences felt more honest than anything she'd ever said. Then one day I found an envelope. It was hidden inside a kitchen drawer. My name was written across the front. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single handwritten sheet of paper. No greeting. No apology. Just a list. Line after line. Memory after memory. Every hurt she could remember causing. You were 8 when I told you that you'd never be as pretty as Jenna. You were 14 when I called you boring in front of your friends. You were 17 when I missed your award ceremony because Jenna had a date. You were 23 when you begged me not to take her side, and I did anyway. The list continued. Page after page. Moments I had forgotten. Moments she hadn't. At the bottom she had written, I don't know if this list will ever be finished. I just hope someday you won't need it anymore. I sat there for a long time. The kitchen was completely silent. For years I had wanted validation. Proof that I wasn't imagining everything. Proof that the favoritism had been real. Proof that the wounds existed. Now it sat in my hands. Not from a therapist. Not from a witness. From her. I folded the paper carefully, then placed it back inside the envelope. I didn't forgive her. But I didn't throw it away. That was new. After that, the weight I had carried most of my life started changing. Not disappearing. Changing. The desperate need for her approval began fading. The exhausting need to prove myself. To earn love. To earn fairness. To earn a place. I finally understood something. None of those things had ever been mine to earn. They were things she should have given freely. And her failure wasn't my responsibility. One afternoon, Mark noticed the difference before I did. We were sitting in the kitchen after Ava had gone to bed. "You seem lighter," he said. I laughed quietly. "Lighter?" "Yeah." He smiled. "Like you finally stopped carrying something." I knew exactly what he meant. For decades I had been carrying my mother's choices, her disappointments, her favoritism, her expectations. Now, for the first time, I was setting them down. Not because she was sick, because she had finally stopped pretending they weren't there. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow disappeared. The trees began budding again, but my mother's condition kept getting worse. The doctors stopped using hopeful language. They became gentler, more careful, the kind of careful that tells you everyone already knows where the road ends. I kept the same routine. Appointments, meals, medication, paperwork, the practical things. But somewhere along the way, I started staying longer. Not because I felt obligated. Not because I suddenly became the devoted daughter people expected me to be. The truth was more complicated. For the first time in my life, my mother and I were speaking honestly. Not as mother and daughter trapped inside old roles. Just two people facing consequences. One afternoon, I finally asked the question that had followed me for years. "Why Jenna?" She looked up from the blanket in her lap. "What? Why was it always Jenna?" Silence stretched between us. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. I waited. Eventually she sighed. A tired, defeated sound. "I thought you'd always be okay." I frowned. "What does that even mean?" She looked away. "You handled everything. You survived everything. Every time Jenna made a mess, you fixed yours and kept going." Her eyes filled with regret. "I convinced myself you didn't need me." The answer hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was pathetic. A lifetime of favoritism reduced to an excuse. I didn't need money. I didn't need gifts. I didn't need special treatment. I needed protection. I needed a mother who stood up for me the way I spent years standing up for everyone else. But by then I wasn't 8 anymore, or 14, or 23. I wasn't waiting for that version of motherhood anymore. And strangely, realizing that felt freeing. As the weeks passed, my mother never mentioned Jenna again. Not once. Even when a forgotten credit card statement arrived showing a $386 purchase from a beach boutique in Florida, she stared at the charge, then laughed quietly. Not with amusement, with disappointment. The kind that comes when reality finally catches up. One morning I arrived and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook. She was writing. Slowly, carefully. The pages around her were covered with folded envelopes. "What's that?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Letters." "To who?" "Everyone." Then after a pause, she added, "Mostly the people I failed." I didn't ask to read them. Words had never been her strength. Actions mattered more. And surprisingly, her actions continued changing. She stopped arguing when I organized medication. Stopped trying to control every decision. Stopped pretending she was still in charge. For someone like her, surrendering control might have been the hardest apology possible. March became April. Then one afternoon she made a request. A simple one. "Could I see Ava?" I froze. She immediately shook her head. I understand if the answer is no. For the first time, she wasn't demanding, wasn't expecting, wasn't manipulating. She simply asked, "I know why you kept her away." Her voice cracked. "And you were right." I looked out the window, thought about the balcony, the snow, the fear, the nightmares Ava had after that winter. Then I looked back at my mother. "I'll think about it." A small smile appeared, not triumphant, grateful. A few minutes later she spoke again. "Thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Not for the appointments." She swallowed. "Not for the food. Not for the medicine." Her eyes met mine. "Thank you for not abandoning me when I gave you every reason to." For a moment neither of us spoke, because there wasn't anything left to say. A few days later, my phone rang. I already knew before answering. The hospital confirmed it. She had passed peacefully in her sleep. No pain. No distress. Just gone. After the call ended, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house felt impossibly quiet. Part of me expected overwhelming grief. Part of me expected relief. Instead, I felt something in between. A complicated sadness for a relationship that never became what it should have been. Later that afternoon, I picked Ava up from school. We went to the park, sat on a bench together, and I told her, in simple words, gentle words, the kind a child could carry without being crushed by them. She listened carefully, then asked, "Is Grandma in the stars now?" I smiled softly. Maybe. That seemed to satisfy her. Children often accept mysteries better than adults. A few days later, I returned to my mother's house. The letters were waiting. One addressed to me, one to Ava, one to Mark, even one addressed to Jenna, though I doubted she'd ever read it. I sat at the kitchen table and opened mine. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but unmistakably hers. There was no dramatic confession, no secret inheritance, no shocking revelation, just honesty, page after page of it. Near the end, one sentence stopped me. "I never deserved your love, but you gave me something better. Your honesty." I read it twice, then a third time, because she was right. For years, I had hidden my pain, minimized it, buried it, protected her from it. The moment I stopped doing that was the moment everything changed. Not because it fixed our relationship, because it finally made it real. The funeral was small, just a handful of people. No grand speeches, no dramatic scenes. Mark stood beside me. Ava held my hand. The spring air carried the scent of fresh grass and blooming trees. Jenna never came. Not for the service. Not afterward. Not even a phone call. At one point, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her. Not at Mom. Not even at myself. The anger had burned out somewhere between the hospital visits and the letters. What remained was clarity. For most of my life, I believed keeping the peace was the same thing as love. I thought protecting people from consequences made me kind. I thought silence kept families together. I was wrong. The truth nearly destroyed my family. But it also saved what little could still be saved. As the funeral ended, people slowly drifted away. Mark squeezed my hand. Ava leaned against my side. The wind moved gently through the trees overhead. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt free. Not because everything had been forgiven. Not because every wound had healed. But because I finally stopped carrying burdens that were never mine. I looked once toward the grave, then toward my husband and daughter, the family I had chosen, the family that had chosen me, and without looking back again I walked forward,